Hello, welcome to Tub Talks with Damon. On this day, Hot Tub Talks with my very special guest, my friend and inspiration, Phill Wilson, creator of Black AIDS Institute, person living, teaching, speaking, helping people learn how to live lives in a healthier way, in a more joyful, inclusive way for now more than 40 years. Welcome to Tub Talks, or welcome to your tub, my show, Tub Talks. Thank you for being here.
Oh, my pleasure, my pleasure.
Okay. I'm nervous because you are, very few people, I'm starstruck around very few people, but you're one of them.
Well, thank you.
I'm asking all my guests to begin with. Tell me what you like most about your body.
Wow. Probably I would say my eyes.
What do you like about them?
I think I have friendly eyes, actually. I think I have inviting eyes. So, yeah. And they still work.
Yes.
Yes. So that's important.
And your inviting eyes and your understanding eyes, I think, has also been such a part of your presence. Like, so when we're in meetings or I see you speak at conferences, even if you're on a stage, the way you speak, the way you look, your compassion exudes. And I know not everyone does that in our community. A lot of people can talk about a lot of things, but their humanity doesn't always shine. And every time I've seen you speak, you're just like, you got the audience in tears. So I want to go back a little bit. You have, I feel like your impact on the HIV community, the progress we've made in prevention and treatment is largely, or partly at least, I say largely, thanks to you and the many contributions you have made. But let's go back. You have talked about first learning of your HIV diagnosis at the very beginning of when we were learning about them. Can you say more about that?
Well, I actually had two diagnostic experiences, actually. One happened very, very early on. I came out in 1980 in the context of a relationship. My partner, my first partner, the first person I ever was intimate with was a guy named Chris Brownlee. And I met him and we became a couple right away. And in 1981, he had a physical where he discovered that he had swollen lymph nodes. And he came home and I mentioned that I also had swollen lymph nodes. I had thought about them, but his doctor thought that they were connected with this new disease. This was probably July of 81. So the MMWR had just come out in June. And so we went to the doctors and lo and behold, my lymph nodes were swollen. The doctor said that he thought that both of our lymph nodes were connected to this new disease, maybe, possibly. Then the disease was primarily in New York. Now, we lived in Chicago. There were some rumblings in San Francisco. So we didn't think much about it. The next year, we moved to Los Angeles. And by then, already, GRID was a thing.
So for those who don't know, GRID means gay-related
immune deficiency syndrome.
That's what they said before they called it AIDS.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So GRID was a thing. And we were getting our lives together in Los Angeles, and eventually there was a conversation about what to do about this gay plague that came to Los Angeles. And eventually we got very much involved, and in 1980, involved in the early movement, initially just volunteering on the hotline, the AIDS hotline here. The Kaposi-Sarcoma Foundation was in San Francisco. That eventually became the AIDS Foundation of San Francisco AIDS Foundation. And so they were still the Kaposi-Sarcoma Foundation. They came down to Los Angeles to suggest that an organization be started here in Los Angeles at the Gay and Lesbian Community Services Center. The center declined, but a group of people did start a hotline. And so we started volunteering for the hotline. We owned a company at the time called Black is More Than Beautiful, and it was a giftware manufacturing company. So we had graphics and designs and images and what have you. And so we would donate, our inventory and our images and all that kind of stuff to the beginning folks that are starting to do posters and things like that. So then, and we also were involved in an organization called Black and White Men Together that did weekly raps, and the topic of those raps were often around this new disease. So fast forward to your question, eventually they came out with an HIV test. And by then, my partner, Chris, was already diagnosed with AIDS, and he was already sick. And by then, I was working at the Gay and Lesbian Community Services Center. I founded the very first AIDS prevention project at the center back then. And so I decided I should go and get tested. I was actually on the team of folks that were opposed to people getting tested because there were no treatments. And we believed that the best prevention tools were for everyone to believe they were positive and to behave accordingly. And we felt that once this test came out with no treatment, that would create a divide. Those who were positive and those that were negative. And for those who were positive, since there's no treatment, it would just create a really increased level of stigma, but also depression and even possibly suicide, and and all these vulnerabilities would arise. It turns out that we were both right. One of the things that the test did was it increased the pressure on there being treatments available, so that was a good thing. But just as those of us who predicted the other happened as well. Increased stigma, a divide, people being vulnerable, losing their homes, losing their jobs, all those kinds of terrible things began to happen. But anyway, I decided to get tested because I decided that I couldn't advise people one way or another if I had not gone through the process. I assumed that I was positive because Chris was already diagnosed with AIDS. But there's a dramatic difference between thinking that a bad thing is so and having all doubt removed. And so I went and got tested, fully anticipating that the results were going to be positive, and that it would be no big deal, and I was completely wrong. I was completely devastated. My doctors gave me, I remember exactly what the doctor at the clinic said. He said, "You have about 6 months to live, so you should go home and put your affairs in order." And I was 27 years old, and I thought, I'm 27, what affairs? What are you talking about? I don't have any affairs to put in order. And so my dad said to me, you have to do your own dying, so you might as well do your own living. And so that's what I decided.
You have to do your own dying, so you have to do your own living.
So you might as well do your own living.
That's power. Yeah. And so at that moment, what did that mean to you at 27, staring at a 6-month?
Well, it meant that I wasn't going to think about the 6 months.
Yeah.
And that I was going to live my life, every day if it ended up being 6 months, for every day of that 6 months, I was going to live my life. I was going to contribute in any way that I could. My mom said that the price of the ticket is to make a difference. And if I had 6 months to do that, then so be it. I was going to do it in 6 months. It turns out that the doctor was a little off in the timing. And
so 40 years later,
so
yeah, little off. Yeah.
So
wow.
But I've never forgotten either of those things, that the price of the ticket of life is to make a difference, and since you have to do your own dying, you might as well do your own living.
Wow. So this propelled you even more to make a difference, to have an impact, to work harder, to serve. And I think for some people, hearing that news may have led them to in a tailspin or a place of being less than. It sounds like it really propelled you to do more.
Well, absolutely. I'm not sure if it propelled me to do more, but it propelled me to do.
Okay.
I knew that there was nothing that I could do, particularly then. We're talking 86. I don't think AZT was around yet, but if so, it was the only thing that was around. So I couldn't do anything about the dying part. No, that was completely out of my control. But I could do something about how I spent however much time I had. And so that's what I focused on.
And then Chris passed away a few years later.
Right, Chris passed away in 1989. And that, the fact that he already was diagnosed was a significant factor as well, because he needed me. you know, he needed my help, you know, and so I didn't have time to worry about this dying thing. There were too many other people that were actually dying. There were too many other people who were manifesting being sick already, and so I needed to focus on other things.
Wow. So then how did that eventually lead to you creating the Black AIDS Institute in the 90s?
Well, I mean, the Black AIDS Institute came late, actually, in my career, because before then, there was the Stop AIDS Project at the Gay and Lesbian Community Services Center. There was working at the Minority AIDS Project.
And you were front and center in the development.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. At the Minority AIDS Project. There was being the AIDS coordinator for the City of Los Angeles, the Director of Policy and Planning for AIDS Project Los Angeles. And that's where I actually got sick. And the reason why this is important, because to answer your story about what caused the Black AIDS Institute, you know, we have to know what happened before that. Yeah. And so in 1996, I got very sick. And again, another doctor, this time, this doctor then said I had 24 hours to live. I got through that episode thanks to David Ho and the new protease inhibitors and the cocktails. But I stopped working, you know, because my doctors were very, very clear that I certainly couldn't work like I had been, because it was in the middle of the pandemic and we were all going 24/7, and I was running a major department at APLA and, you know, doing advocacy and policy work on a global level. And so I stopped working. And then because of the new cocktails, by 1999, I felt like it was time to get back to work. And so I had to decide what to do. And I looked around and I considered a number of things. You know, I considered going back into government, either on a federal level or on a local level. I considered possibly some opportunities in pharma, just a lot of things. But I decided that at that point, again, thinking that there was waiting for the next shoe to drop, that I had to focus. And I decided that I wanted to focus exclusively on Black people. And that's why I founded the Black AIDS Institute.
And what were the differences you were seeing in the experience of Black people living with HIV versus the white community living with HIV in terms of services that were available?
Well, as still exists today, there were huge disparities. You know, there are resources that were not present in Black communities that were present in white communities. But more importantly, that the Black community was not taking ownership of the pandemic. We had not yet decided that it was our pandemic, you know, and conversations were really around HIV in a Black context was connected to proximity to whiteness, you know, and I knew that that had to change. And
can you say that again? So that means that HIV was being defined kind of as a white
in all circles,
yeah.
You know, in white circles and in Black circles, you know, the HIV was a white disease, you know, and it impacted gay men, which was code for white gay men.
Yeah.
And that had not been my lived experience. That my lived experience was that, you know, not just gay men, but Black men and Black women were getting sick and dying, and there was not the community infrastructure in place to take care of us. And the institutions that historically have been responsible for taking care of us were not doing their job. They were not stepping up to the plate in regard to this issue. And so we started the Black AIDS Institute for really one reason, and that was to declare that HIV and AIDS was a Black issue, and that Black institutions had to address it, and that the only way that it was going to stop in our communities is if we were actively involved in the leadership of the efforts to stop it. And on a more global level, that any effort to end the AIDS pandemic nationally or globally that did not actively and proactively and aggressively involve and engage Black people was destined to fail.
Yes. Now, how was that message received at the time?
You know, interesting enough, it actually was received quite well. And I think it was received quite well. Of course, there's resistance. There's always resistance. I think it was received quite well because the messenger matters. You know, there had been, of course, white people who have been saying, you know, the changing face of the epidemic is Black, and there have been efforts to reach out to Black organizations, you know, and there were a number of Black organizations on national and local levels that were doing amazing work. So we were really just adding our voice. I was creating an organization to add a voice, to amplify, to strategically think in a different way on how to address this issue in Black communities. But the fact that we decided that we were going to approach the pandemic and engage Black communities in an unapologetic way. We were not going to do it from a place of shame. We were not going to do it we were not going to allow space for someone to think that it was possible for them to kick us out. You know, that we embraced our Blackness, we owned our Blackness, you know, and we said we are a part of this community, you know, and if you don't address this issue, that means that you are not in support of our community in its wholeness.
Yeah. Beautiful. And you said the messenger matters. You being the messenger.
Well, not me being the messenger, but that we were the messengers, yes. That Black people were the messengers. You know, Black people talking to Black people educating Black people becoming the authority figures on this disease. Prior to that, now all of the authority figures were white, you know, and so our initial efforts, all of our initial initiatives were about creating, you know, key opinion leaders that were Black, were about creating authority figures that were Black, you know, engaging already established authority figures in Black communities to say, you need to take a leadership position on this issue and you need to know what you're talking about. Yeah. So a lot of our issues around raising HIV science literacy in Black communities, about making sure that folks got the facts, about not shaming folks because they had suspicion around medical infrastructure, and kind of being clear that we have a right, we have earned our right to believe that the systems that are created by this government and this society potentially are created to harm us. Now, and unless and until you can show us otherwise, we have a reason to distrust you. Before, the narrative was always around conspiracy theories in Black communities as if they weren't justified. And while I think that a lot of conspiracy theories are not true, they're not based in fact, but the fact that we have them is absolutely a reflection of our lived experience. And that's what the Black AIDS Institute was about.
Well spoken. Thank you. I'm so glad we're talking about this. You're a popular man.
Yeah, we should probably do something about that.
We're just hanging out in the tub. You know, we get phone calls. You're in demand. I don't mind. 22 years later, what would you say has been some of the greatest achievements of the Black AIDS Institute?
I think the biggest achievement of the Black AIDS Institute, that in fact we were successful in getting Black communities to take ownership and to engage in the pandemic. You know, at one point, every major national Black organization in America had a AIDS initiative, had a AIDS strategy. That was important. You know, for a period of time, you couldn't go to the NAACP or the Urban League or Operation Push or 100 Black Men or 100 Black Women or a Black fraternity or a Black sorority or an HBCU or a Black newspaper or a Black elected official and HIV not be on their mind. You know, and so I think we were a part of that change. You know, one of our most successful efforts was to get literally all of the black magazines at the time to publish an AIDS cover story at the same time. That was a significant thing, to get, Jesse Jackson and Julian Bond and others, to get tested publicly. That was a success, to get black churches and black ministers, to kind of speak from the pulpit around HIV. Our efforts combined with the Balm and Gilead and the Black Leadership Commission on AIDS and numerous local organizations, black organizations around the country were instrumental in making that happen.
Wow. And in retrospect, what could have been done differently, or what would you have done differently knowing what you know now? What?
I don't know. I mean, I don't necessarily know if I like that conversation at all, because that's never an option. Yeah. It's not a useful narrative, because you don't know what you know now then. And so that's useful if in fact that was a possibility. I know people always ask that question. So I don't know. I mean, gosh, no, I don't know. I mean, I guess I reject that notion.
Fair enough. Yeah. While you were talking about trust of medical professionals and the reasons for mistrust of medical professionals, I couldn't help but thinking about the parallels of COVID and what we've been seeing over the last year and a half. Do you feel like the messages that you put out, or the messaging of Black AIDS Institute, has been instructive in terms of helping Black community understand COVID or how to respond?
Yes,
to
but
COVID?
I mean, you if we're honest, you have to we should talk about the parallels, but you also have to talk about the differences. And the differences between HIV and AIDS is that there was not a mainstream effort to misinform.
Yes.
And that's a dramatic difference. Of course, there were efforts to misinform. I happen to believe that the misinformation did not come out of malice when it comes to HIV and AIDS. That were people who genuinely believe different things. With COVID-19, that is not true. There are people who are in leadership positions who are tested, who have gotten tested for HIV, and then encourage other people to not get tested. There are people who are vaccinated themselves
for COVID.
Right, for COVID.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, that's
okay.
HIV.
That's okay.
Who are telling people don't get tested for COVID, and they are tested for COVID. There are people who are telling people don't get vaccinated, and they're vaccinated. That is malicious intent, and that's a difference, okay? And particularly when it comes from the highest level of some quarters of our society. So that's a big difference. Now, what is useful to know, I think, is that quite frankly, 100% of the advances that we've made in COVID-19 and the speed in which we have been able to make them are completely connected to work that we did in HIV/AIDS space.
Yes. Say more. What?
The science is based on the bench science we did in HIV and AIDS. The ways and the notions of mobilizing people and educating people were built on the lessons we learned in HIV. The ability to scale up and build infrastructure to provide testing and vaccination, and even the notion around creating therapeutic remedies for COVID-19 are built on the building blocks of HIV and AIDS.
Yes.
And so, if we are able to end the COVID-19 pandemic, and ending is going to look interesting, but if we are successful in that endeavor, it's because of the sacrifices and the contributions and the investments that we've made in HIV, and particularly the HIV and AIDS community.
And Phill, I see you as part, like the front of that, or one of the front people in line. Does that resonate to you, or is there part of you that's like, no? I mean, I really see, I agree with you about how so many of the lessons learned that we're still learning from HIV and AIDS carry into COVID. I just feel like you were just one of those people on the front lines at the very, very beginning who made those messages salient for HIV and for COVID.
I mean, I definitely received that I played a role in that, and I'm very proud of that.
Yeah.
You know, it's not one of those areas where I have false modesty. I'm not delusional to think that I was either at the front of the line making that happen, or the only person. But certainly, I feel like I played a role, and I feel like, and I'm most proud of the fact that when some others moved on, I did not. You know, in the it was the early 90s, at APLA, we came up with this slogan that until there's a cure, which meant that we were going to be in the fight until there's a cure. Mm-hmm. You know, and I remember giving a speech opening up when APLA moved to their huge building on Vine Street, and I gave the speech opening that facility. And I said, today is not an occasion for celebration. No, that we're moving into this huge facility. You know, today, is an occasion to acknowledge how devastating and how tragic this pandemic is. The day for celebration is when we shut down this building. That's the day for celebration. And so I am very proud that I had the wherewithal and the support and the grace of God and the stupidity that when others were moving on, that I stayed in the fight for as long as I did.
Yes. Were you ever accused, or were there ever insinuations that by starting Black AIDS Institute that you were taking away resources or attention to, quote, mainstream HIV organizations? Did you ever get that kind of
Of course, that I was being divisive and what have you. So the message, for example, our key message was AIDS in America is a Black disease. Everybody hated that slogan. You know, white people hated that slogan because they felt that it dismissed the fact that the gay community was still in the throes of the pandemic, and by saying it's a Black disease, that somehow it was saying that white gay men were no longer at risk and no longer getting infected and no longer dying. Black people hated it because they thought that it further stigmatized Black people. And my point was that, number one, I never said or believed or thought or felt that it was only a Black disease, but I had taken on the mantle to fight for Black people in the context of this pandemic. Mm-hmm. And so AIDS in America is a Black disease made sense to me from that lens. But secondly, the facts bore itself out, that if AIDS could be characterized as a white gay disease because the people who were being seen were white and gay, even though it never was a white gay disease. In fact, it never was primarily a white gay disease in a global context. Then the facts of the matter that Black people from the beginning were disproportionately impacted both on the global and the domestic stage. The fact that, for example, Black women from the very beginning represented over 70% of women with HIV and AIDS, that as early as 1986, 25% of people living with HIV were Black, and by the early 90s, over 50% by all measures. No matter the demographic nature, gender, age, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, the majority was always Black, or at least plurality were Black. Yeah. So yes, so people were concerned about that. And just like now, and always as exists in our society, whenever Black people claim our place in our society, we are accused of being divisive. And that is one of the ways that racism manifests itself, and white supremacy shows its ugly head in our society. To simply say that you're Black and you're proud somehow is to say that there's something wrong with whiteness. No, when the truth of the matter is, I'm not thinking about whiteness. And quite frankly, that's the thing that white people are most upset about. That it's not that we hate them or don't like them. They can't stand the fact that we create a space that we're not thinking about them, that they're irrelevant. And that's why, we stand up and we say Black Lives Matter, that there's such a pushback by white people, and that it is not about them. And the majority of white people in this society can't stand to be not in center stage, And again, that's the way that racism and white supremacy manifests itself in our society. And so for Black people, for us to stand up for ourselves, whether we're talking about the Black AIDS Institute, or whether we're talking about the Black Lives Matter movement, whether we're talking about the disparities that exist in HIV and AIDS, or we're talking about the disparities that exist in COVID-19. Now, when we declare that we are here and we refuse to be less than, we refuse to accept less than, we refuse to be perceived as less than, then people get ugly.
That's right. Do you think there's any traction in that changing? Do you see any hints that there's a possibility that any of that mindset and white-centered paradigms are going to change at any point?
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, I think that... So change is not linear. It happens in bursts. It is forward, backwards. It is turning around the corner. All these things, there's quantum leaps, and then there is incremental change. So what I would say is that without a doubt, we are not where we were in 1956, okay? But we should not be delusional. We are not where we need to be. And so, yes, we are making progress. But the way that oppressors oppress is that they measure by where you were instead of where you need to be.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so if you are beating me up 7 days a week and you decide you only want to beat me up 5 days a week, I should be grateful. But I'm not grateful because I don't think you should beat me up at all. And somehow, if I say, no, you shouldn't beat me up at all, then, I'm not grateful. Then I'm being special, or I want special rights, And no, I'm not going to accept. I don't think Black people should ever accept. I don't think LGBTQI people should ever accept. You don't have the right to beat me up. And until we're in a place where that's not happening, we've not made enough progress. And I'm not going to thank you, because you only beat me up sometime.
Yeah. Well put. Thank you. Thank you. Now, in 2018, you took a step away and retired.
I did.
Or I put retired in quotes because I think you're still doing so many things. What led to that decision to retire?
Well, I decided to retire because I believe that my grandfather was a minister, and there's a chapter in Ecclesiastics that talks about a time. There is a time to cry and a time to laugh. There's a time to be born and a time to die. And I believe that movements are sustained by understanding of one's time. And I believe that we were and we are at a time that the success of the next phase of the HIV/AIDS movement is dependent on generational change. That there are things and were things that I believe I was very good at. There are things that are needed today that were needed in 2018 that I was not very good at. and more importantly, that I didn't want to become good at.
Such as?
Oh, I mean, all sorts. I mean, I'm not so interested in becoming an expert on social media. I'm not interested in that. And I'm not good at that. And so, and that is a critical tool. There are tools that we use that I was in a position to use in 1999 that some people who were involved before I got involved were not as adept at. There are tools that are absolutely essential in 2021 and 2022 that I'm not so adept at, and I'm not interested in becoming adept at them. No, there is an experience of HIV and AIDS that is different. The folks are different than a 65-year-old black man. And so the people leading that effort need to reflect that population, need to have a shared lived experience with that population. And all of us, and I think really literally all of us need to move out of the way. The best way we can serve, the best way that we can be respectful of all of our friends that we have lost, that we have loved, is to get the heck out of the way and to support the brilliant leadership of younger people in this effort, because this, in fact, is now their pandemic. And so my goal was to try to get out of the way, to try to help set the table for new leaders to step up and be involved in that regard.
And how has your life been these years of retirement? I mean, pandemics, global pandemic like COVID aside, how has retirement felt to you?
Well, number one, I feel that it was the right thing to do. I am so glad that I am not doing what I was doing. I think that, I may have been the right person at that time. I'm not the right person now. I'm really happy about other things that I've been able to focus on. I am grateful that I was able to spend a tremendous amount of time with my mother during the last 2 years of her life. We lost her in July of 2020. And one of the things I am most grateful for in this entire life is to have been able to spend that time with her. That's important to me. And I've been able to spend some time thinking about who I am outside of the context of HIV and AIDS. I think my entire identity was completely embedded in an HIV, AIDS, LGBTQI, activism context.
Yeah.
And
what are you learning about yourself?
I don't know yet. We'll find out. We'll find out. The jury is not in. The journey is not over. What I have found out that there is something else there, and so exploring that, So I'm not at the answer stage.
Okay.
But I'm at the stage of still asking questions and finding out. Asking questions, and that's good. That's good.
What brings you joy now in this sort of, as we're migrating into a new year, sort of in this post-COVID, what's bringing you joy in your life?
That's a very good question, because I'm at a point in my life at this moment where that is a big topic. And again, it's a topic that I don't have the answer to, but certainly I've spent the last 2 years working a lot on my house, gardening and figuring out how to be a friend. I was always an activist friend. That all of my friends were friends when there was something that we were working on together. But the minute that I moved to another project, then those are my friends, and then to another project. And so I didn't have a way to maneuver a personal life that was completely disconnected from my activist life. I was lucky because most of my friends were activists, so they were forgiving in that regard because they too were moving on to different things or different projects or what have you. But now, you know, I'm figuring out how to be that kind of a friend, and that is bittersweet. But building those friendships, going back and reconnecting with people. I'm writing a memoir, and so figuring out, really dissecting my life and kind of stepping back and looking at it. Also trying to process, and this is bittersweet as well. It's more bitter than it is sweet. Processing the trauma and, quite frankly, the post-traumatic stress syndrome that I am experiencing, and I think many of us are experiencing over decades of suppressing grief and compartmentalizing pain, and now being in a place where there is space where I can't help but being in touch with whatever current pain exists, but also whatever previously unaddressed pain that may be in my psyche and in my heart and in my body. So that's been hard, but I think that I'm convinced that that will be a good thing.
Thank you.
Because suppressing all that pain and hurt and grief, is not good, And so as a result of that, embracing and demanding joy is a big part of my primary vocation these days.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Again, I'm so grateful to you for this interview, because for the way you share your life experience personally, professionally, emotionally, it's a generous thing. And it seems that that kind of service and connection has really driven so much of your life and inspires me so much. And I know so many others too. And speaking the truth.
Thank you.
Being vulnerable. So thank you. All right, Phill. Anything I haven't asked you that you want to know or share with the world or talk about as we're losing sunlight, but it's gorgeous. I love this. It's like we have this gorgeous
night, the beautiful night, Los Angeles, twilight. So it's great.
Anything else you would like to share? Any other insights or thoughts you would like to convey in the tub?
If you're good, I'm good.
Okay.
So we're going to have to turn on the jets because the water's getting cold.
Okay, the water's getting cold. But thank you so much, Phill. Thank you for speaking with me. Thank you for talking with the audience. And I hope that this is just these ideas are the beginning of even more conversation in our community amongst friends, perhaps in their tubs or their hot tubs or over lunch or coffee. What does healing even look like? Do we even have a concept of what that word is? How do we go forward from trauma? And what do we do with all that shit that we've been collecting for these past 30, 40, 50 years? I think these are really important discussions to have.
And important times.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. If you liked the interview, push subscribe underneath. If you didn't like it, send it to someone else that you don't like.
Subscribe anyway.
Subscribe anyway. And thank you for watching Tub Talks with Damon. See you next time.
Bye-bye.